I thought my husband was a struggling businessman, but when I walked into his office to surprise him with a fortune, I discovered he was the mastermind of an organized scheme that would land him an enormous sentence. I wasn't his partner. I was the perfect cover for his illegal trade, and now I was the only witness left standing in his way. The champagne in my hand felt colder than the marble floor of the foyer, but it was nothing compared to the ice forming in my chest. For 3 years, I had been Sarah the struggling tutor, the woman who clipped coupons and repaired her own heels with superglue. That was before the letter arrived, the one from a solicitor in Zurich detailing the death of a great aunt I'd never met, leaving behind a fortune that would make a tycoon blush. I didn't tell Mark right away. I wanted it to be a surprise, a grand cinematic revelation that would sweep away every shred of stress he'd been under lately. He'd been working late for months, buried under the pressure of his consulting firm, coming home with dark circles under his eyes and a weary smile that broke my heart. I wanted to tell him that we were free. No more student loans, no more cramped apartment, no more midnight anxiety about the future. I had spent the afternoon buying a sleek, velvet-lined box for the keys to the penthouse I'd just secured in the city's most exclusive district. I was going to hand them to him, along with a pair of plane tickets to a place where the sun never stops shining. I took a cab to his office complex, a brutalist concrete tower that felt far too cold for a man as warm as Mark. It was nearly 10 in the evening, and the building was mostly dark, save for a few flickering strips of fluorescent light on the 7th floor. I didn't call him. I wanted to see his face light up when I walked in, to see the exhaustion vanish the second I revealed the life-changing truth. The security guard at the desk was new, a bored-looking kid who barely glanced up from his phone when I told him I was Mrs. Sterling. He waved me through with a lazy flick of his hand, and I took the elevator up, my heart hammering a nervous, happy rhythm against my ribs. The hallway was hushed. The carpet muffled my steps as I approached his corner office. I reached the frosted glass door, my hand raised to knock, but I froze. From inside, I didn't hear the click of a keyboard or the soft hum of his business calls. I heard a voice I didn't recognize, sharp, cold, and echoing with authority. "The delivery is scheduled for midnight," the voice said. "If the courier gets cold feet, remind him exactly what the service thinks of people who hold on to the packages. We aren't just moving assets anymore. We're managing a risk that could land every single one of us a massive, decades-long stretch in a federal cage." I stood paralyzed, my knuckles white as I gripped the gift box. "I know," Mark's voice replied. It was his voice, yet entirely unrecognizable. It was stripped of its usual tenderness, replaced by a chilling, calculated edge I had never heard in our 3 years of marriage. "The inventory is secured. I have the illegal items in the safe, behind the wall panel. As soon as the internal security wing clears the perimeter, we move. No mistakes this time." My breath hitched, a small involuntary sound that seemed to shatter the silence of the corridor. Inside, the voices stopped dead. There was a sudden, violent scraping of a chair against the hardwood floor. I pulled back, my soul fracturing, realizing that the man I'd been planning a future with wasn't working late. He was building an empire on the back of a dangerous, organized scheme. My hand trembled as I looked at the glass door, watching as a shadow moved across the frosted pane, heading directly toward the handle. He was coming to the door, and as the latch began to turn, I knew my life was about to end, one way or another. The handle turned with a sharp, metallic click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent hallway. My instinct was to run, to sprint toward the elevator, but my legs felt like they were cast in lead. I pressed my back against the cold, textured wallpaper of the corridor, holding my breath so hard my lungs burned. The door swung open, casting a rectangle of harsh, artificial light into the dim hallway. "I told you there's no one out here," a stranger's voice growled from behind Mark. "I heard something," Mark hissed. His voice was lower, more predatory than anything I had ever heard in our kitchen or our bedroom. I stood paralyzed, the velvet box clutched to my chest like a shield. If they caught me, there would be no explanation, only the grim reality of what they were hiding. I realized then that the consulting firm wasn't a cover for a struggling business. It was a front for a massive operation involving restricted materials. I felt a surge of nausea. The man I had married, the man who used to hold my hand through the grocery store aisles, was essentially a high-level logistics coordinator for a criminal network. I saw his loafers step into the hallway, followed by the heavy boots of a man twice his size, someone I'd never seen before. Mark scanned the hallway, his eyes narrowing. He was holding a sleek black device that looked like a scanner, a tool for checking for bugs or unauthorized surveillance. My pulse was a frantic bird in my throat. If that device picked up the signal from my smartphone, it was over. "Probably just the building's ventilation," the stranger muttered, turning back toward the office. "Focus, Mark. The internal security check is only an hour away. If they find even a trace of the forbidden substances or any hint of our organized scheme, we're looking at an automatic charge of an incredibly serious nature. We don't want to spend the rest of our lives behind bars for a simple oversight." "I'm not failing," Mark snapped, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and arrogance. "I have the ledger. I have the keys to the safe. By morning, we'll be ghosts. I've already set up the offshore accounts. The heiress, my wife, she's the perfect cover. As long as she thinks I'm just a struggling businessman, no one looks at our financials. She's the ultimate blind spot." The air left my lungs. I wasn't his partner, I was his camouflage. I was the struggling tutor he used to keep the authorities from looking too closely at his bank statements. And then he dropped the bombshell that stopped my heart. "What about her?" the stranger asked, nodding toward the closed office door. "She's starting to get suspicious. You said she's been asking about the late nights." Mark let out a cold, hollow laugh. "Don't worry about her. I've already filed the paperwork for the life insurance policy under her name. If she gets in the way of the shipment, she's just another piece of overhead we have to write off. By midnight, she won't be a problem." My blood turned to liquid ice. He wasn't just hiding his secrets, he was planning to dispose of me to protect his interests. I retreated backward, my heel catching on the carpet, making a soft, audible thud. Mark spun around instantly, his gaze locking onto my position in the darkness of the hallway. His face went pale, then hardened into a mask of pure, terrifying indifference. He pulled something from his waistband, not a phone, but a heavy, dark object that made my skin crawl. "She's here," Mark whispered, his voice devoid of any recognition or love. "Catch her." As he lunged toward me, I didn't think. I just turned and bolted toward the service stairwell, my heart hammering a death knell in my ears, knowing that my fortune, my secret inheritance, was the very thing that had just signed my death warrant. I crashed through the heavy steel door of the stairwell, the echo of their footsteps pounding behind me, and as I reached for the railing to descend, I realized the stairs had been blocked off for repairs. I was trapped on the 7th floor with no exit, and the door behind me was already swinging open. The heavy steel door groaned as it swung open behind me, the sound of Mark's polished shoes hitting the concrete landing like a countdown. I didn't look back. I scrambled over the yellow caution tape blocking the stairway, my designer heels clicking erratically against the dusty cement. My lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass, but the primal urge to survive outweighed the terror. I reached the landing between the 6th and 7th floors and saw the barricade, a mountain of drywall and metal scaffolding. I was boxed in. "Sarah, don't be foolish," Mark's voice boomed, bouncing off the concrete walls. It was smooth, devoid of any genuine affection, the voice of a man who viewed people as variables in a ledger. "You've seen too much. You have no idea how deep this organized scheme goes. If you keep running, you force my hand." I pressed my back against the cold wall, my phone vibrating violently in my hand. In the scramble, I had managed to hit the emergency override on my banking app, the one that immediately notified my private security team from Zurich the moment the account was accessed under duress. I didn't just have an inheritance. I had an elite protective detail that had been monitoring my struggling life from afar, waiting for the exact moment I chose to access the wealth. "I know exactly what you are, Mark," I shouted back, my voice trembling but rising in volume. "You're not a businessman. You're a liability." He rounded the corner, his face twisted in a sneer. The heavy, dark object in his hand was unmistakable now, a piece of illegal weaponry he had intended to use to erase his own wife. He raised it, his finger tightening on the trigger. "You were supposed to be the perfect front. A quiet, unsuspecting wife. You ruined it all." Before he could pull the trigger, the entire building groaned. A thunderous crash echoed from the floor above. Not a gunshot, but the sound of heavy tactical doors being breached. A series of sharp, authoritative commands ripped through the air. "Internal security, drop the weapon, get on the ground." Mark froze, his eyes widening as the stairwell door above him was kicked inward. Within seconds, professional tactical agents in full gear swarmed the landing, pinning Mark and his accomplice to the concrete before they could even blink. The scanner Mark had been holding clattered to the ground, sliding toward my feet. The accomplice began shouting about legal rights and attorneys, but the agents were silent, efficient, and lethal in their precision. One of the agents stepped forward, his face obscured by a visor. He didn't look at Mark. He looked at me. "Mrs. Sterling, we have been waiting for your signal. The internal security wing has been monitoring this organized scheme for months. Your husband was the final piece of the puzzle we needed to dismantle the entire operation." I felt the adrenaline drain away, leaving me hollow. As they hauled Mark past me, he didn't beg or apologize. He glared at me with a look of pure, unadulterated venom. "You think you've won? You have no idea what you've unleashed. This isn't over." "It is for you," I said, my voice steady for the first time that night. As they led him away toward a massive, decades-long stretch in a federal facility, I watched him go. I didn't feel sadness, and I didn't feel fear. I felt a cold, clear sense of liberation. The fortune in Zurich was no longer a burden or a secret. It was the weapon I would use to ensure that every single person connected to his illegal activities was rooted out. I walked out of that building into the cool night air. The penthouse keys were still in my pocket, but I didn't want the penthouse anymore. I wanted a life that was truly mine, one that didn't have a price tag, a cover story, or a traitor waiting in the shadows. I looked up at the stars, knowing that while my old life had been burned to the ground, I was finally, for the first time, wealthy enough to build something real. The trial would be long. The recovery would be painful. But I was no longer the struggling tutor or the gullible wife. I was the architect of my own safety, and for the first time in years, the future was entirely in my hands.